think about impact, it really has to start with the mission. If your school has a sufficiently distinct mission, you're going to have 2 or 3 pillars that really stand out. Maybe it's a focus on ethics. Perhaps it's an emphasis on applied learning, an international perspective, or the idea that you're going to help develop your community. But these are the things that people know about your school and associate with it. So these are the areas in which you really can have an impact. And when you start off, I think you want to start thinking about how you are operating, what your environment is, and what your local community's like. So having an impact doesn't mean that you have to have this grandiose plan to change the world. You simply want to maximize the value and the consequence of the things that you're already doing. So for example, instead of using a canned simulation game in a business policy course, maybe what you do is you get a local project, a company that needs some assistance, a startup perhaps, and you have your students work on that. Or perhaps you can use a situation like when you're developing your critical thinking, your teamwork, communication skills. Instead of doing that with some sort of textbook case or a project that you've designed, what you do is you have your students develop a financial literacy program that they can teach at the local high schools or offer to the public at large. So anything that you are already doing, if you can take it and think about how you can do it better and make sure that there is value to be had outside. When your faculty is thinking about this, you start off, and I think you have to give them examples and share internally what types of activities are impactful and what potentials there are. I know when we first got our faculty to talk about what impact they had, the responses were really in a pretty narrow set. It was only when we started sharing ideas across people, across the departments, that faculty would realize, wait a minute, I do something like that, or even better maybe, I can easily do something like that. So the internal sharing and giving examples and opportunities for impact is what can really help you make changes. I think it's also important to make sure that you're collecting these things as you go along. For one thing, it's easier for people to remember the things that they do. And the other thing is that you can share these internally and externally and celebrate them, which builds that momentum for people thinking not in terms of, here are the activities I undertook or completed, but instead, here's the difference that I've made. You know, I've seen a lot of great creative things in schools that I've visited or in reports that I've read. You know, one example is students who are operating a student-managed investment fund. All right, so they do the typical pitches, the stock selections, but in one case, what they did is they involved their alums and they invited the local community. So the school was actually giving a seminar on what stocks it would recommend for investments. So there are a number of these things that I think are easy enough just to elevate a little bit and think about the difference you're making. You know, also an important thing, a best practice I've seen at schools is when schools think about rewarding and recognizing impactful practices. So it should be part of your annual reporting to ask faculty not just what they did, but how that impacted others around them. And merit pay. If you're thinking about a system of merit pay, you might want to consider whether that should be something that you reward. And finally, I think it's a great idea to recognize, the same way we recognize excellent teaching, the way we'd recognize high-quality research, but to perhaps have an annual award for those groups or individuals who have really moved the needle in some way. But just the regular celebration and the recognition this is part of what we should be doing is, I think, what can make a change for schools in a way that is organic, in a way that won't take up too much time or stress your resources too greatly.